My name is Daniel H. Gallancy. I'm the CEO of Atakama. So the browser has become the focal point of all of our work. When I say all of our work, what I mean is anyone who is a knowledge worker, chances are that person is spending an enormous amount of time doing work in the browser, whether that's using SaaS apps, nowadays using AI. Nowadays we do things like use Microsoft Word and Excel in the browser. Basically, all of our work that had been done on standalone applications has moved into the browser. There are some exceptions, but what's interesting is that we now frame it as there are some exceptions. And if you think about the way the world worked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we wouldn't necessarily have framed it that way. We would have framed it the other way. We would have said, we use these standalone applications for A and B and C and D. And there are some exceptions where we use SaaS applications in the browser. And that has now completely flipped. So Atakama was built to solve the problem of security within the web browser. And that has multiple components to it. So the first is visibility. What are users doing in the browser? And we ask that question not to be Big Brother, but rather to find out where the gaps are in terms of security posture. And that can be anything from the usage of weak passwords, right, or breached credentials that are somewhere out on the dark web, to inadvertently using browser extensions that have security problems, across the board to uploading files to websites where they don't necessarily belong. Again, a lot of this behavior may be inadvertent, but it happens. The list goes on and on and on. There are so many activities that we engage in inside the browser that you need full security coverage. We have a boatload of new AI-focused features in the browser. AI has emerged more quickly than perhaps anybody could ever have imagined. And the pervasive use of AI isn't going to decrease, it's going to increase. It's going to increase exponentially. And the interface between the human and the AI occurs in many places, but one of the most important places in which it occurs is the browser. We want our partners, our customers, to be able to understand what their users are doing with AI and what risks that activity creates. And a lot of that stuff is benign, a lot of that stuff is ordinary and not a big deal. But then on occasion, what you'll see is a user, again, not usually maliciously, uploading some particular sensitive file into ChatGPT and then asking a bunch of questions. By the way, the user is probably accelerating the pace of their own work. Great. However, the lack of visibility that administrators have into that activity creates all sorts of security risks. My personal favorite actually happens to be our extension management feature. Extensions are sort of this ignored kind of redheaded stepchild of security, and they cause so many problems, right? You put an extension in your browser and it has an enormous amount of access into what you are doing in the browser. And many of these extensions are not really properly vetted. I would say most of these extensions are not really properly vetted. And historically, there have not been terrific tools to go through the inventory of extensions and say, this one's good, this one's bad, this one's mediocre, I want to get rid of this one, I want to keep this one, I don't know, this one I'm going to mark for later. You need this sort of tool in order to understand what extensions are being used and in order to decide what extensions ought not be used. One of the questions that I have received repeatedly is, what are the biggest drivers of our business today? And it's interesting, I would say that there are three big drivers. One, and this is the most boring one, is there has been a long-standing gap around browser security. It's simply been an issue that had not been addressed. I would say it was time to address it more than 5 years ago, but for whatever reason, it hadn't been addressed. Well, here we are, and we are addressing it now. And a lot of the features that we have in our platform, I think, just simply fill gaps that have already existed. The second is, of course, the emergence of AI, right? So AI presents all sorts of unique challenges, and we need to deal with those challenges. And the third, interestingly, is the explosion in scams. And I say that as distinct from traditional phishing and traditional attacks and issues that you would see and have seen for many, many years. scams are now multimedia, multi-channel. So you see things that occur via text message and then migrate into a website, right? You see things that start in this chat and end up over here. And by having coverage in the browser, we can protect users from getting scammed. The moment that I realized the importance of this was when a customer asked us to add a feature. He said, can you add a feature that tells us anytime one of my users is visiting a gift card website? And I was taken aback by the request. I was like, it's an interesting request. And then it occurred to me, the bigger picture is scams are so pervasive that he's come to the realization that none of his users are visiting a gift card website for legitimate reasons. They're only visiting a gift card website if they're about to fall victim to a scam.